Well, if you have your Bibles, if you could take your Bibles out and turn to Matthew chapter 5. Today is a very interesting topic. It's a very good topic that we need to talk about, probably apropos for being at the end of the year, because it's something we really need to look into for 2020. You know, some of the biggest headlines that have been going on the last couple of years have been these scandalous sex scandals, you know, and we've seen, you know, like from 2017, the Harvey Weinstein scandal. And then just recently, if you watch Survivor, they even had some kind of a scandal on there with this man named Dan Spilo. It's one of the biggest topics today. And it's all over the internet. It's all over the news. And it's all about sexual behavior of men in the entertainment industry and stories of women being harassed and assaulted and threatened and demeaned. After Weinstein's story broke out, you know, one of the people encouraged a whole bunch of other people to actually respond on Twitter with 2 words, #MeToo. And I just want to say, you know, there were like millions of stories after that. And maybe you're one of those stories. And I just want to say to you, I am so glad that you are here. I am so glad that you have come to a place where you can come to a place of healing. And you need to hear this. None of it's your fault. And so we're here in this place. And part of what has been confusing for people is that these assaulters, they tend to live a double life. You know, publicly, they tend to proclaim, you know, gender equality and, you know, empowerment for women, but then they live a totally different life with closed doors, abused power, and these silenced, shame-terrified victims. And this is all coming not just from the entertainment world, but from the political leaders, from academic leaders, not to mention some spiritual leaders. All of this got me thinking, you know, if you ruled the world, how could you stop sexual harassment from ever happening on this planet? How would you do it? In our culture in this day and age, in our workplaces and in our schools and everywhere we go, what's commonly taught is this whole idea of consent, this whole idea of the ethic of consent. And the goal here is to actually teach people to recognize when consent has actually happened for sexual activity, whether it's wanted or where it's not, and for it to actually be followed. That's the key. To make sure that everybody knows how to honor it. Now, why is it wrong? Why is it not just wrong? Why is it evil to violate consent? Well, the reason violating consent is so evil is it's connected to what we've been learning in this greatest sermon ever told, in the Sermon on the Mount. You have a kingdom. I have a kingdom. And we learn that our kingdom starts with our bodies. And when somebody else, when another person uses your body against your will to satisfy their sexual appetite, it violates your kingdom. And that's wrong. That can shatter your soul. It can give you a world of hurt. And that's what makes it a sin. That's why when somebody's consent is violated, it's so evil. And it's also why power, which is the assertion of our wills, and sex are so commonly intertwined and connected. It raises a really big question, actually a lot of questions that don't get asked a lot in our culture today. What kind of a person do you need to be in order to be capable of honoring consent? You know, what kind of habits, what kind of self-disciplines are required in order for us to be capable of honoring consent? Jesus and the biblical writers were really clear on this, that it's actually possible for a person to become enslaved to their desires. And it happens all the time to all of us, one way or another. This is why people may hold on to a belief system in a public way of, gender equality or traditional ethics, but then in the quietness of the silence of their own home or behind closed doors, they live a totally different way. You see, my friends, desire has made these people lost. And it's made them to the point where they are monstrous predators. Another question, what sort of spiritual formation do you think people like Weinstein or this guy Dan Spilo received? Because make no mistake, every one of us receives spiritual formation in one way or another. Everybody is having their spirit, everybody is having their inner life formed, their thoughts, their desires, their intentions. Everybody is having it formed by something or somebody. What we're learning in this series is that the greatest opportunity ever given in the history of mankind is that up there has come down here, and that we have the opportunity for our spiritual formation to actually be taken over by Jesus Christ. It's where I can merge my little kingdom into His great kingdom, and that's where life change can happen. Last week we looked at what that would mean as it relates to anger, as it relates to reconciling with your brother or sister. I hope you're still doing that. This week, we look at this amazing topic of sexuality, and this is Jesus' teaching from Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 27. He says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." So the big question is, who's a good person when it comes to sexuality? In our culture, one might say somebody who honors consent. That's sexual goodness, to honor consent. In Jesus' day, you have to understand, they had the 10 commandments. That 7th commandment was, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." So in Jesus' day, for them a good person was, somebody who didn't commit adultery. If you didn't commit adultery, you were good. And if you did commit adultery, you were bad. You'll notice in the text, Jesus is addressing men. He's addressing all the guys. This whole idea of a power differential between men and women, we think it's kind of from our culture. No, this is not a new thing. This was something that was a huge part of the law in the ancient world. This whole idea of a double standard when it comes from a male and a female perspective actually comes from ancient days. This is actually from an ancient Roman law. And when I talk about this is speaking to men. Okay? If you should catch your wife in adultery, you have every right to put her to death. But if you should commit adultery, she must not presume to lay a finger on you, nor would the law allow it. Now, Jesus doesn't allow what the Romans did. He's actually sticking up for women's rights here. Jesus doesn't say what a lot of people tend to say today and what they tended to say back then. If a man lusts after a woman, maybe it's the woman's fault. You know what? Maybe she was wearing something she shouldn't have been wearing. You know what? Maybe she did something. My friends, kingdoms are systems of personal power. And people who have power will abuse those kingdoms to protect their reputations and protect their personal desires. We see it happening all the time in kingdoms all over the place today. And Jesus says, no, that's not okay. For Jesus, lust is the responsibility of the person who lusts. This idea of looking lustfully, Jesus talks about, is really so important, but it often is misunderstood. So we're going to spend some time on it a little bit. Jesus uses language here, whoever looks and continues to look, who goes on looking. In other words, Jesus isn't saying sexual attraction itself is a bad thing. That's actually God's idea. You know, sex was a beautiful thing that God created. God created your hormones. God is pro-hormones. Our sexuality is part of who we are, whether we're single or we're married, whether we are young or old. It's a constant, state of mystery and wonder and joy, no matter what stage in life. I was standing on a crowded shuttle bus not too long ago. And there I was, and I was kind of holding on to one of those things in the aisle. And there was this young woman, and she was attractive, and she was just looking at me, and I thought to myself, wow, I must still got it. And she says to me, "Sir, would you like to have my seat?" Yeah. And I realized I'm not sure I ever had it. See, Jesus isn't talking about attraction or noticing attraction. What he's talking about is someone who deliberately indulges in sexual gratification by a constant look or stare. He's talking about what might be called the look, right? You all know the look. A couple is at a restaurant. A woman is waiting on the table there. The man is staring at the waitress in a constant look, gratifying some sexual, gratification. The waitress notices, maybe she's a little bit embarrassed, maybe it's a little bit awkward, but maybe she's also kind of like, wow, there's a little bit of power here. Let's take advantage and get a bigger tip. The wife sees what's going on and is crushed. The wife sees this and she just feels rejected and she feels angry. If she even mentions it to him, he's just going to deny it. So he adds lying to his failing marriage. And this is what happens. The look itself is a public act with a public effect. And Jesus knew about this. He noticed this about humanity. Let me pause here because sexuality is an area that involves a lot of emotion. It involves embarrassment. It involves some shame. It involves hiddenness. It involves, pretending. So my friends, we here at this church, we need to not be about pretending. We need to be about radical honesty. So we're going to step into the light here. Let's do a mass confession. You never thought you'd do this in church. Everyone's like, ugh. If you have ever committed a sexual sin of any kind, if you have ever looked at something you should not have, if you have ever flirted with the wrong person, if you have ever given the look, if you have ever tried inappropriately to get the look, if you have ever withheld yourself sexually to hurt your spouse, if you have ever failed to talk to your kids helpfully about sexuality, if you ever felt a single moment of your life that you could use your help from God in some area of sex, if you have ever said the word sex, I want you to just raise your hand right now. All right. We all have a problem. This sin affects everybody. Jesus is talking about something far deeper than the ethic of consent. You might think of it this way. We bring to a relationship three different areas, three different dimensions, if you will. We bring our commitment, which is something that we do with our will. We bring our emotions, which is our feelings of how we are with somebody else. And we also bring our bodies. So a level of commitment, our emotional engagement, and our physical being. Sexual intimacy is God's invention to unite two people, to unite two souls together. And this whole covenant of marriage is actually a public declaration of a permanence of commitment to one another. It's a promise. Listen. To be sexually intimate with a person that you're not married to is to make promises with your body that I withhold in my will. And that can cause you a world of hurt. And that's why it's a sin. My friend, if you're following Jesus and you're involved in a sexual intimacy with a person you're not married to, you need to stop. Jesus is clearly defining goodness in this area of sexuality as something way deeper than just avoiding having sex with somebody who's not your marriage partner. All of us are going to need to be pure from the inside. How are we going to get there? And this is where it gets challenging. This is where things kind of get a little bit confusing for people. Jesus says in verse 29, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. Does that strike anybody else as kind of extreme? I mean, really? He doesn't just say any old eye. He says your right eye. Now, in ancient times, the right side was the best side. It was the favored side. So the right eye is the best eye. In Bible times, the right side was the best side. And he says, if you have a problem, gouge it out. He doesn't say, get an eye patch. He doesn't say, just carefully take it out. He says, gouge it out. Not just gouge it out, throw it away. Don't put it in a jar and, pop it in later. I don't know where you went with that, but gouge it out, throw it in the garbage disposal. That's what he's saying. Now, so often, people think that Jesus is exaggerating here. That his idea is that we need to take the obedience of God really, 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 really seriously, but not that seriously. Now, other people have taken Jesus literally on this. There was actually a Greek scholar, his name was Origen. He took it so seriously, he had so much shame and so much confusion with his sexuality that he had himself castrated. Now, Jesus isn't saying that. Jesus is actually trying to show something about how true goodness is not just about avoiding sin. You might think of it this way. He uses a little bit of humor here. You might think of it as, if the goal of God for human beings is to avoid sinful actions, we could just do that through surgery. We cut out your tongue. You'd never speak a bad word to anybody else in your life. You'd never speak deception. You'd never ever harass anybody. You could cut off your hands. You'd never use them for promiscuity or violence. You could gouge out your eyes and you'll never look at pornography again. You'll never get the look. You'll never stop giving the look. You'll never stop judging people by their looks. Hey, cut off your legs too. You'll never go places you're not supposed to. You won't go into those massage parlors, or you won't go into that woman's house, or you won't go into the adult bookstores. Cut off your ears while you're at it, because then you'll never listen to seductive words or gossip. Cut off your sexual organs and you'll never misuse them again. Let's not forget your skin. That needs to come off too, so you never ever use those nerve endings for sensuality. And you and I, we can just roll up into heaven just, mutilated stumps. I mean, should we do that? A lot of churches offer membership. We could offer dismembership. You could dedicate your life to dismembership. In the church where I grew up, they actually extended the right hand of fellowship. As we do that, we could just have it cut right off for you, and we could be a church about all dismembering our dismemberment. It's just nuts. Understand, Jesus has a very important point to make. He knew what he was saying when he used these words. That God's will for you is not just to avoid sin. In Jesus' day, there were a group of rabbis. This is for real. There were a group of rabbis in his time who actually wanted to avoid adultery so much that they decided for the rest of their life they would never look at another woman. So no matter what they were doing or where they were going, if a woman came into view, they would just close their eyes. And I kid you not, they were literally called the bruised and bleeding rabbis because they were just falling over, walking into walls. They'd run into the street and get hit by a donkey because they would never want to look at a woman. These parts of your body were given to you by God, not primarily to not sin, but to do good. It's a different thing. It's a different mentality. See, the real problem with spiritual growth by dismembership, the real problem with that is it doesn't work. Here's the thing, the real problem isn't your eye, the real problem isn't your hand. Jesus is really clear what the real problem is. He says it in verse 28, it's your heart. You know, your heart represents the innermost, deepest part of your being. It's at your core. That's the secret place of where my spontaneous thoughts and desires and my perceptions are. And that's what needs to change. That's what needs to be remolded. That's what God wants to change. See, if I live for desire, I end up a slave to my desire. That's why this whole ethic of consent, if I want to live just by that, that's not the way we're going to be able to live our life effectively. Desire always narrows our thinking and our perspective. If I want to elicit gratification from a woman, you understand there are 1,000 things that desire will stop my mind from thinking. 1,000 things. I have to forget that woman is somebody's daughter. I have to forget that if another man looked at my daughter the way I'm looking at this woman, I would want to kill him. If I want illicit gratification, I have to not think about my wife. I have to not think about my children. I have to not think about my church. I have to not think about my God. Desire will do this to somebody. Desire keeps me from 1,000 thoughts. It keeps 1,000 thoughts out of my brain. Now the will. The will is different than desire. The will is your kingdom. And it's quite different. The will often seeks options. The will actually try to find the largest perspective. Desire will always try to enslave and control the will. And without God's help, it will every time. Here's the good news. The good news, there is freedom in the area of sexuality. There is freedom in every area, but especially in the area of sexuality when we bring it to light. When it comes out in the open. When we stop wearing masks, when we stop pretending, when we stop being people that we think we need to be instead of being the people who we know we are. I have to be honest with you, some of you have been dreading this topic because you're carrying around guilt and shame and regret. There's freedom and grace and healing for anybody who will come honestly before God and before others and just say, you know what, I'm going to step into the light. I have a friend that lives in California who knows everything about me, and he's my guy. I talk to him about everything. I texted him this morning. When I need prayer, I'll reach out to him. When I am struggling in an area, I will talk to him. Very often it includes this area of life. For a long time, I tried struggling with my sexuality all by myself. Or at the most, just me and God. That'll be enough. It's not enough. Guys, it's not enough. I did that until I was humbled enough to realize that I needed accountability. I have to humble myself enough to tell somebody else, hey, I want you to hold me accountable. I need for you to know all my stuff. I need you to know my secrets. And I need you to help me where I'm tempted. I'm sharing this with our guys in our church. You know, we need to have accountability in every area of our life. Whatever's going on in your life, I want you to know there's healing, there's hope, and there's help. See, when you get to the end of your life, you can do a few things. You know, you can look at the end of your life, you can look back at the history of sexual struggle and hiddenness and brokenness and constant temptation and guilt and shame. You can try to do it alone. You can try to limp back and forth between giving in and then guilt and then praying to God for forgiveness and then giving in and then guilt and then praying to God forgiveness and just going through this cycle over and over and over again. You can keep the secrets in a deep, dark place. Don't let anybody know about it. You can have your ability to worship God constantly being thwarted, constantly being blocked and inhibited. You can have your relationships at risk. You can put your family at risk. You can put your integrity at risk. Or you can pray to God, God, I need help with this, and I need help. I need you to help me find somebody to keep me accountable, because I can't do this alone. Not my will be done, but your will be done. You can find a trusted brother. Ladies, find a trusted sister. You know, find a Christian counselor. There are Celebrate Recoveries all over the city. Go find a Celebrate Recovery. Join a group there. This is a place where everybody is welcome. Nobody is perfect. Anything is possible as long as we're willing to do one thing, though. Be real. Not wear masks. We have nothing to hide here. Can I let you in on something? Everybody here is just one step away from, one decision away from being a total train wreck. Without God, we're all train wrecks, you know. Here's the thing, if you're willing to admit that, if you're willing to live your life by that, if you're willing to arrange your life around the idea that you can look back on your life at the end of your life and you know what? I messed up. I have a messed up past, but God has the power to redeem and restore and to love and forgive. And may His power be revealed through my weakness. There's real power in that kind of testimony. We can be that kind of community. We can be that kind of church, men and women who learn to be honest about not only our sexual struggles, but be real with our sexual shame. And be able to treat each one another with dignity and with honor the way we have been created to as we worship this Jesus who is amazing in our lives.